Tonight, we're looking at two different men in two different states, years apart, but tied together by the same terrifying pattern: control, escalation, and ignored warning signs. First, the Thanksgiving triple murder in Chesterfield County, Virginia, where 59-year-old Christopher Gattis tried to hide a planned family execution behind the words self-defense. Then we moved to Michigan, where Gregory Green was given a second chance after killing his pregnant wife, only to destroy an entire blended family years later. It's 11:34 p.m., November 23, 2017. Officer Frazier's body cam switches on as he arrives at a quiet home on Dogwood Ridge Court in Chesterfield County, Virginia. On the front steps sits a man, calm, hands visible, no visible injuries, no panic. His name is Christopher Gattis, 59 years old. He tells police he just defended himself from intruders, 3 of them, inside his own home. But hours earlier, the house looked like a postcard. Security cameras show Christopher and his wife Janet setting up for Thanksgiving, centerpieces on the table, wine glasses being polished, a refrigerator full of turkey, cranberry sauce, and all the classic holiday food. Their daughter, 30-year-old Candace, arrives with her boyfriend Andrew, a construction supervisor who still has dust on his boots from work. They bring a covered dish and a bottle of wine. There are smiles, a burgundy sweater her mom gave her, and the kind of small talk that fills every family holiday. From the outside, it's a normal Thanksgiving. On paper, though, the cracks are already there. Janet has been telling her sister about Christopher's paranoia and money troubles. Candace has been confiding in friends that her father's drinking and behavior are getting worse. As the evening goes on, security and phone records start painting a very different picture from the calm story Gattis tells police. At 8:47 p.m., Candace walks out to the porch alone. On camera, she lights a cigarette, wipes her eyes, and crushes it after just a few drags. Something her mother's journal notes she only did when extremely upset. Text messages from Candace's phone show the escalation in real time. Dad's drinking again. Getting weird. Mom's trying to keep peace, but I'm done. And at 10:59 p.m., might leave early, can't do this anymore. Christopher would later claim he hadn't really seen Candace that evening. The digital record says otherwise. At the same time, a neighbor's doorbell camera records shouting from the Gattis home. You can't make out every word, but one line from a female voice is clear. Stop it, just stop. Meanwhile, Christopher's own history is working quietly in the background. Court records show a past assault conviction, a bar fight where he turned violent in seconds, breaking another man's orbital bone, a pattern that will soon become important. Gattis tells police the confrontation ended around 11:28 p.m. and that he simply called 911 afterward. But dispatch logs show something else. The first call from the house comes in at 11:29 p.m. A woman's voice says one word, "Help," before the line cuts off. 3 minutes later, there's a second call from the same landline, this time from Christopher, calm and controlled, reporting a home invasion and 3 people down. When officers enter the house, they find Andrew in the living room, Janet in the hallway, and Candace near the kitchen. A .45 caliber pistol lies on the coffee table with an empty magazine. Gattis claims he grabbed the gun from a drawer and fired in self-defense as intruders rushed him. But forensic evidence tells a different story. Gunshot residue patterns show he fired from multiple positions, not from a single spot while being attacked. Trajectory analysis reveals Andrew was shot while seated, then as he fell, and finally with a fatal shot from above. An execution, not a chaotic struggle. Janet was shot while fleeing down the hallway, with close-range evidence and defensive wounds indicating she was trying to protect herself. Candace was shot in the back as she tried to move toward the kitchen, with no signs of a confrontation. The gun-safe log shows the weapon was taken out at 10:42 p.m., nearly an hour before the supposed home invasion. The ammunition is hollow point, far more destructive than the rounds Christopher claimed he usually kept loaded. On top of that, his phone tells its own story. Before the shootings, he Googled Castle Doctrine, Virginia, self-defense against multiple attackers. How long before police arrive? At 11:21 p.m., minutes before he says the attack started, he texts his brother saying he might need that lawyer information they discussed. This isn't a panicked man reacting in the moment. This is someone preparing. Once confronted with the digital and forensic evidence, Christopher's self-defense story collapses. He is arrested in the same living room still decorated for Thanksgiving. Later in an interview, the calm mask cracks. He admits he got the gun just in case, admits he shot Andrew first because he was the biggest, then shot Janet as she ran and Candace as she tried to get away. The sequence perfectly matches the forensic reconstruction. In July 2018, rather than risk trial, he pleads guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder. The judge calls it what it is, not a moment of fear, but the calculated elimination of family members who threatened his control, financially, emotionally, and socially. He receives 3 consecutive life sentences, effectively spending the rest of his life in prison. The community tears the house down. 3 oak trees are planted where it stood. A memorial fund in Janet's name supports domestic violence work. Their story is now used in police and FBI trainings as a chilling example of how digital evidence can expose a carefully staged lie. And yet, as horrifying as this case is, it's not an isolated story. Gregory Green looked on the surface like a man from a stable background. Born in 1966, involved in church, supported by his parents and sister. But in 1991, his life, and the lives around him, took a horrific turn. He was in a relationship with a woman named Tanya, who already had 2 children and was pregnant with his. Behind closed doors, things were falling apart. Tanya told a close friend that Gregory was becoming violent, irritable, and possibly involved with substances. She planned to leave him after church one Sunday. That day never came. At around 1:30 a.m., Gregory calmly called 911 and said he'd killed his pregnant wife. Police arrived to find Tanya dead on the kitchen floor, stabbed multiple times. One of her children had survived by hiding. The unborn child did not survive. Gregory tried to argue mental illness and insanity, but was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 to 20 years. For many people, that sentence already felt far too light. In prison, Gregory did what many inmates seeking release do. He took classes, completed programs, went to church, and collected glowing letters. Starting in 2004, he went before the parole board multiple times. Early on, they noted he showed little remorse and even blamed Tanya. He was denied 4 times, but his family and pastor never stopped pushing. His mother wrote that he'd gained insight and was truly sorry. His sister emphasized his religious transformation. Pastor Fred Harris, a civil rights activist and prison minister, wrote passionate letters saying Gregory had paid for his lack of self-control and deserved a second chance. By 2008, the board saw a man with good prison behavior, a strong support system, and people promising him a job and a church community. 2 of 3 members voted to release him. He walked out. He completed parole. He was welcomed into the same church that had vouched for him, and then he married the pastor's daughter, Faith. Faith had 2 teenage children, Chadney and Kara, from a previous relationship. Together, she and Gregory later had 2 young daughters, Coy and Kay. At first, things looked stable. Church, work, blended family life. But over time, Faith started noticing terrifying signs. Mood swings, explosive anger, an incident where he kicked a couch while the baby was lying on it, threats that she would regret it if she left. She tried to get a protective order. It was denied. She didn't fully present his violent homicide history. She went back, hoping things would improve. They didn't. By 2016, she filed for divorce. That move appears to have triggered Gregory's final descent. On September 22, 2016, Gregory put his plan into motion. He lured Faith into the basement, restrained her with zip ties, and shot her in the foot so she couldn't escape. Then methodically, he cut her with a box cutter, leaving her injured, terrified, and forced to watch what came next. Upstairs and outside, he had already set a deadly trap. Earlier that night, he had moved the family car into position and rigged it so that exhaust fumes silently filled the interior. His 2 youngest daughters, Coy and Kay, were strapped in the back seat. They never had a chance. The carbon monoxide slowly replaced the air they were breathing, turning the car, something that should have been safe, familiar, ordinary, into a sealed chamber of poison. Back in the house, the horror escalated. With Faith still bound in the basement, Gregory went to get her teenage children, Chadney and Kara. There is no soft way to describe what he did. He brought them downstairs into the cold, unfinished basement, where their mother was already bleeding and helpless. He positioned them in front of her and shot them. Each shot was a deliberate act, carried out close enough for Faith to see every detail and hear every last word. After killing 4 children and nearly killing Faith, Gregory did what he had done decades before. He called 911. Calmly, he admitted what he'd done and waited for police to arrive. as if this were something that could be processed and logged like any other crime. The scene officers walked into was described as one of the worst they had ever seen. Children dead, a mother bound and gravely injured, the car still reeking of exhaust from the lethal setup outside. Faith was rushed to the hospital and, against all odds, she survived. Her children did not. In court, Gregory pled guilty. There was no real question of his involvement. The only question left was how the justice system would respond to the devastation he'd caused. According to his lawyer, he just wanted to get it over with, as if speeding through the process could somehow minimize the weight of what he had done. He was sentenced to a stacked term, 45 to 100 years, plus additional time for a firearm charge, effectively ensuring he will likely spend the rest of his life in prison. For many people watching the case, that still didn't feel like enough, because there is no number that matches the loss of 4 young lives and the permanent injuries, physical and emotional, inflicted on their mother. Faith attended court in a wheelchair, still recovering from her injuries. She faced the man who had once promised to love and protect her, and who instead turned their home into a crime scene. Her statement to him was raw and brutal. There is no punishment that fits what he did, no justice that can bring her children back, no sentence long enough to balance what she watched happen in that basement. Years later, she wrote a book, The Monster That Kills His Family Twice, the Faith Green story. She also appeared in a documentary episode titled A Special Place in Hell. She did not do this to relive the horror for attention or spectacle, but to warn others about red flags, about ignoring violent histories, about believing he's changed when every pattern says otherwise. Her story has become a cautionary tale for people who are told to forgive, to move on, to trust that faith and love alone can keep them safe. At the same time, Faith faced brutal judgment from some people on the outside. They asked why she married a convicted killer at all, or why she went back after the abuse started. Those questions might feel logical from a distance, but they overlook the reality of manipulation, spiritual pressure, and community influence. They ignore the way churches, families, and entire social circles can rally around the idea of redemption while quietly placing the burden of risk on the person who is most vulnerable. They forget the hope so many victims cling to, the hope that the person they love really has changed, that this time the promises are real. The harsh truth many people took from this case is simple and deeply uncomfortable. When someone has already killed a partner, that is not just a mistake or a bad chapter. It is a massive, flashing red warning light. It tells you what they are capable of when pushed, when challenged, or when they feel their control slipping. Ignoring that history doesn't make it disappear. It just shifts the danger onto new victims. In this case, ignoring that warning cost 4 children their lives and left one mother with a grief and trauma she will carry for the rest of her life. And yet, as hard as it is to confront, cases like this are not just about one monster. They are about missed chances to intervene, institutions that chose optimism over caution, and lethal patterns of violence treated like background noise instead of a blaring alarm. 2 different states, 2 different men, 2 sets of victims who trusted them. In Virginia, a father and husband who couldn't stand losing control of his money, his image, and his authority turned Thanksgiving into a crime scene and tried to hide behind the word self-defense. In Michigan, a man who had already murdered once was given a second chance by a system, a church, and a family that believed in redemption. He used it to kill 4 more children and nearly kill his wife. In both stories, the warning signs were there: sudden rage and prior violence, paranoia, threats, obsession with control. Past homicide treated like an unfortunate chapter instead of the brightest red flag there is. We like to believe we'd see it coming, that we'd leave or speak up or connect the dots. But most of the time, the danger doesn't show up wearing a mask. It shows up as stress, as he's just in a bad mood, as he's changed, as he loves his family, he'd never do that. If there's one thing these cases make painfully clear, it's this: history matters, patterns matter. And when someone shows you that they're willing to hurt the people closest to them, that's not something you file away and forget. If you or someone you know is dealing with a partner who's violent, controlling, or has a history of serious harm, please treat it like the emergency it is. Reach out to local hotlines, shelters, or trusted professionals. Silence and hope are not safety plans. If you want more in-depth breakdowns where we follow the receipts, digital evidence, and psychology? Be sure to like this video, subscribe to Crime Nest, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case. And in the comments, tell me this. Which red flag from these cases do you think was the most dangerously ignored? And what should communities, churches, and families do differently when someone like this is asking for a second chance?